the management meeting for July 28th, 2021 to order. The Metropolitan Council has determined it's not practical or prudent to conduct in-person meetings in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Accordingly, committee members will participate in this meeting via telephone or other electronic means, and the meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 at the date and time stated above. We encourage you to monitor the meeting remotely. If people have any comments, we encourage the members of the public to email us at public.info@net.state.mn.us, and we'll respond to your comments in a timely manner. With that, can we call the roll to confirm we have quorum, please?
Barber. Here. Gonzalez. Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Lilligren. Muse.
Here.
Ferguson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have quorum. Are there any adjustments to the agenda that we've posted? All right, seeing none, we will look for an approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the July 14th, 2021 meeting?
I'll move approval.
Move to approval by Barber. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Seconded by Johnson. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll?
Barber. Aye. Thank you. Gonzalez. Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren. Muse.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Our second item, our business items we have today are business item 2021-143JT, 2021 Unified Budget Amendment for the second quarter. Stuart?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Stuart McMullen, Director of Budget and Operations, and I am bringing forward the second quarter 2021 Unified Budget Amendment. With me and available to answer questions are Heather Augustin-Hebner, Ned Smith, and Ed Petrie, Finance Directors for CD and MTS, Environmental Services, and Metro Transit, respectively. This amendment makes changes to the operating budget in regional administration and the operating and capital budgets in each of our operating divisions. The proposed amendment was reviewed and approved by the Community Development Committee on July 19th, the Transportation Committee on July 26th, and the Environmental Services Committee yesterday on July 27th. This amendment adds an assumed 2% increase in salary and wages and an increase for the cost of benefits to the budgets of regional administration and community development. The 2021 Unified Budget was developed as we were all trying to deal with and understand the impact of the pandemic to our budgets and did not include a presumptive salary or wage increase. This change increases the expenses for regional administration and creates a slight increase to the allocation for each of our operating division. This amendment also aligns the expenses of the 7 equity projects approved in April by the Council in Regional Administration and Community Development budgets. It adds 2 FTEs in procurement to help with the additional transit projects that are coming online. The amendment also returns $668,000 of unused stormwater grant funds allocated by the Council in 2016, and these funds will be committed to the Environmental Services budget beginning in 2022 for water planning operations. This amendment authorizes Metro Transit to move $10 million in MVEST revenues from the operating to the capital budget and $10 million in federal formula funds from the capital budget to the operating budget. It also adds $250,000 that was appropriated by the legislature this session for a planning effort contemplating the transition to and maintenance of electric buses. In MTS, the amendment authorizes the transfer of $55,000 in MVEST from the contracted services operating budget to the capital budget and $55,000 in federal funds from the capital budget to the operating budget. It also incorporates $9.9 million in federal CURSA funds for pass-through to the suburban transit providers. That represents the summary of the changes to the operating budgets. In the community development capital budget, the amendment closes 18 projects and reallocates funding within 23 projects in the ACP. Building on the success at the past legislative session that was described at the last management committee meeting, the amendment reinstates state fiscal year 21 dollars that were appropriated then held back last year and reauthorizes the funds appropriated by the legislature this session for parks projects. In the transportation capital budget, the amendment closes 7 projects in the transit ACP and adds or reallocates funds among 36 projects in the CIP. Notably, $11.4 million is added to the Orange Line BRT and $30.5 million for the Southwest Light Rail project from Federal American Rescue Plan funds. It also authorizes the $57.5 million that was appropriated by the 2021 legislature, aligning these funds with the E-Line and F-Line BRT projects. The amendment also closes 15 projects in the MTS ACP and adds or reallocates funding within 14 projects in the MTS CIP. In the environmental services capital budget, the amendment reallocates equal amounts of funding among 4 projects in the ES CIP, but does not change the dollar amount in the ES ACP or 6-year capital program. All of these changes are described in more detail in the accompanying narratives and tables. One other heads up for the management committee. At this Monday's transportation committee, there was a separate business item related to a grant agreement between Southwest Light Rail and Hennepin County. This business item awaits Hennepin County board action next week. If Hennepin County approves it at that meeting, there will be a separate budget amendment related to that business item before this committee at the next management committee meeting and also going to the council on August 11th. We're not prepared now to answer questions on that prospective amendment, but wanted to let you know of that prospect if you see the next council agenda with multiple budget amendments on it. Turning back to the second quarter budget amendment before the committee, the motion is that the Metropolitan Council authorizes the 2021 budget as amended and in accordance with the attached tables. With that summary, we can answer any questions the committee might have.
Mr. Chair, just point of order, I guess. We cannot hear you. Can anyone else, or is it just me?
Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, better.
Any questions? All right, seeing none, can we have a motion to approve business item 2021-143 JT?
Moved by Barber.
Is there a second?
Second by Lee.
Moved by Barber, seconded by Lee. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber. Aye. Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Musse.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. The motion carries. Our second business item that we have is 2021-193, Occupational Health, Medical, Drug, Alcohol Collections Lab, and TPA Services. Deborah?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I am Deborah Abbey, and my role in Human Resources is to oversee the Occupational Health and Employee Resource Center units. Today, we will be discussing the solicitation for occupational health contracts that was completed in June of 2021. With me today will be Jody Jacoby, Director of Procurement, and Elaine Ogilvy, Supervisor of Equal Opportunity. The amendments to occupational medical, drug, and alcohol collection and laboratory services contracts were authorized in October 2020, and contracts were extended through August 31st, 2021. These contracts are critical to our ability to conduct operations, receive FTA funding, and to ensure that safety-sensitive staff are medically equipped to transport the public and perform safety-sensitive duties. Our contracts that are in place currently will expire in 1 month. The services that were solicited in the April 2021 RFP include medical, on-site drug and alcohol collections, laboratory, and third-party administrative services. Required medical services are performed at clinics by physicians certified as DOT medical examiners. These medical examiners certify that our CDL or our commercial driver's license holders, as well as non-DOT staff, are safe to perform their jobs. Some of the required medical services include DOT physicals, fit for duty, pre-employment, and DOT recertification exams. The drug and alcohol collection services we require are mandated by the Department of Transportation. We require that certified drug and alcohol collectors report to each of our 38 council locations to collect drug and alcohol collections. This requirement is necessary to ensure continuity of operations. The laboratory services we require includes a 24-hour turnaround time and an automated digital results reporting system. And finally, the third-party administrative services we require ensures that the council is compliant with federal DOT drug and alcohol program reporting and records management. The RFP identified service delivery requirements for each of the occupational health services. And at this time, I'd like to invite Jody Jacoby, Director of Procurement, to join us to discuss the RFP solicitation. Thank you, Jody.
Thanks, Deb. Good afternoon, Chair Ferguson and committee members. My name is Jody Jacoby, and I'm the Director of Procurement. At the start of every procurement process, just like this one, there's a lot of effort, collaboration, and activity to ensure we have the right inputs to allow the process to yield the most advantageous outcome. And this project followed a very similar path in coordinating to develop the scope of work and preparing the solicitation document with close working relationship and partnership of both the project manager and also the Office of Equal Opportunity. And so today I'm just going to highlight a few of those activities that were collaborated with for procurement. And first is the engagement of MCUB vendors. Even though no goal was set, the Office of Equal Opportunity sent a list of a few MCUB vendors to engage in the process. And the procurement staff who was assigned to this project sent a targeted email that included notification of the solicitation, key dates, and an invitation to attend the pre-bid meeting and an open invitation to contact him if they had any questions. Second, there was a significant amount of work in preparation of the scope of work. As Deb mentioned, the scope of work was written to allow the service to be unbundled by category, which means that proposers had the ability to submit a proposal based on one category or multiple categories. And this approach allows the council the ability to make multiple awards to the highest ranked proposer in each category of service. Additionally, council staff engaged the MMCAP, which is the Minnesota Healthcare Focused Purchasing Venture, to determine if there were any targeted group businesses or MCUB vendors under contract to provide these services. And council staff engaged and notified these vendors of that solicitation opportunity, and some of those vendors submitted offers. And as I understand it from my staff, there were 2 to 3 targeted group businesses that were identified to provide this work in the RFP. And then finally, procurement facilitated a pre-proposal meeting to discuss the scope of work, to answer any plan holder inquiries, and highlight some of the key items that make this procurement unique, like unbundling, again, unbundling the scope of work. And finally, there were a total of 13 vendors who were notified of this solicitation. The next presenter is Elaine Ogilvie from the Office of Equal Opportunity to talk about the MCUB portion of this solicitation.
Thank you, Jody. Mr. Chair, council members, I'm Elaine Ogilvie, Supervisor of the Small Business Programs. I'm going to talk a little bit about what took place on the OEO side of things in reviewing this contract. Like Jody said, this was no different than any other contract in that OEO reviewed the scope of work and analyzed what the scopes were and the work involved, as well as trying to determine what MCUBs, if any, were we had that could perform these services. Some of the things that we realized, or one of the primary things that we quickly realized, is that we had limited number of firms in this industry at all. There were 8 that had similar NAICS codes that you would relate to this industry, but really what it boiled down to is there were really only 3 that were specific that would potentially do this work. As part of the goal setting analysis and reviewing the scope of work and what the relative availability of MCUBs, what after this analysis, basically what it boiled down to was that the relative availability of MCUBs for this work was less than 1%. It was not sufficient to set a goal that would achieve successful results. So we had several conversations, like Jody mentioned, in collaboration with the project manager at the time that we received the information with the SIM, and actually several weeks worth of conversations between myself, the small business specialist, and procurement and HR in regards to how we can look at this and achieve the best results that we could for MCUBs. In further discussions with those individuals, it was decided that separating out these services provided the individual MCUBs the opportunity to directly compete for this work themselves and directly submit a proposal that would ultimately yield a more successful result than the approach of setting a goal. Now, with the results that they'll talk about in a minute, what OEO's next steps in this process is going to be is to follow up with the MCUBs that were directly solicited. Not only were they directly approached by OEO as part of our goal setting analysis, but they had been approached by procurement and HR as well on the front end of things to gauge interest, to understand their services and the work that they do. Now to circle back and close that loop, OEO will be following up with those firms that were solicited and gain a better understanding as to their lack of interest or why they did not submit a proposal, so that we can better improve our activities based on their feedback. And with that, I will turn that back over to Deb.
Elaine, just a quick question for you. How many, when you did the availability analysis, how many majority-owned firms did you discover in the availability? And how many minority-owned firms did you discover were available?
I would have to go back. I can answer that question for you. I'd have to go back and take a look at our the actual numbers of firms that were certified MCUBs versus firms that are not certified, that are in the state, that are part of that analysis. If I understand your question correctly, is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, so let's say we said there was 1% of the firms available to do the work were MCUB, right? So that would be, let's say there were 3 that actually placed bids in this project, right? So let's say all 3 of that 1%, there had to have been 300, right? Non-MCUB firms that are available to do work, but only 13 of them placed a bid. So I'm curious as to how we think about who's available, right? So if we assume that only registered businesses on the MCUB side are available, but everybody, whether or not they really do this work, if they're not a registered MCUB, anybody in that NAICS code that we search, whether they're a company that does 5,000 a year in revenue or however big they are or how much work they do, they're all available. And we use those 2 numbers to do this calculation. It leads us to, I think, potentially some bad conclusions, because it sounds like when we looked at the bids, right, a quarter of the firms that submitted proposals were MCUBs, and yet we still didn't think that that's enough participation to set a goal.
Mr. Chair, council members, I'm not sure that any MCUBs responded at all to this solicitation. I will refer to Jody on that, but it's my understanding that there was not any that responded at all to the solicitation, nor were awarded. But yes, I can get that information for you. I believe in what you're referencing. But there were, in terms of actual certified MCUBs in this work, there were really only 3 that were applicable.
Yeah, and so just curious as to how we determine who's applicable for the other side of that calculation, right? So, because I think we do a lot of work to make sure that the MCUBs are able to do the work and it's applicable to them. But we do the same review of all of the non-MCUB businesses that are the other side of the equation? Is my question, right? We don't want to hold the MCUBs up to a different standard than we hold the non-MCUB businesses to.
Yeah, I think I understand your question, Mr. Chair. And it is a bit of a nuance in that there is that element of the non-MCUBs in that calculation.
Right. Okay, sorry, go ahead. And how many years is this contract?
Mr. Chair and committee members, the request is for a 5-year contract.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, Deborah.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and committee members, next I'll be discussing the outcome of the solicitation and the request for approval from this committee. A total of 23 organizations were invited to respond to this RFP. 19 proposals from 8 proposers were received. 4 proposers submitted proposals for medical services. 5 proposers submitted proposals for on-site drug and alcohol collection services. 6 proposers submitted a proposal for lab services, and 4 proposers submitted a proposal for third-party administrative services. 4 criteria were used to evaluate all 19 proposals of this best value RFP. Those criteria were quality, qualifications, experience, and price. The evaluation committee for this RFP met 3 times to discuss the merits of the proposals. The highest ranked proposals were identified and a best and final offer was sent to those proposers. The BAFO, or best and final offer results, resulted in tangible results, including lower pricing for the 2 highest volume services, which are medical services and on-site drug and alcohol collections. Panel members recommend a contract with Minnesota Occupational Health for medical, drug and alcohol collection, and laboratory services based on proposer qualifications, quality of current service, including speed, efficiency, and consistency, and the ability to meet future needs of the council. Panel members recommend a contract with CMS Medical Services to provide drug and alcohol compliance reporting, records management, and program consultation based on proposer qualifications and ability to meet current needs of the council. The motion at hand is that the committee authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute contracts 21P068 with Minnesota Occupational Health to provide occupational health medical services, on-site drug and alcohol collection, and lab services in an amount not to exceed $3,962,650, and that the committee authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a contract with CMS Medical Services to provide drug and alcohol program administration services in an amount not to exceed $248,133. The total procurement value for this 5-year contract will not exceed $4,210,693. Thank you very much.
Thank you. How did this compare to our last contract for these services?
Mr. Chair, the last contract, Minnesota Occupational Health handled the medical services and the on-site drug and alcohol collections. We contracted with a different vendor for laboratory, and we didn't have a third-party administrative service prior to this requested contract.
Is the pricing similar though on how we measure per test, or are we seeing a price increase or price decrease?
The prices were favorable with the best and final offer. There is a proposed 2% increase that would apply to year 4 and 5. But as a result of the best and final offer, that 2% increase would only involve supplies that the vendor would need to purchase if the supply costs were extraordinary.
And any questions from council members? Okay, so we want to just have a quick conversation just on the MCUB side of these contracts, which is related to this one, but goes beyond, I think, this particular contract and just sort of the thinking. So One of the creative things that procurement was trying to do with this contract is to split it up so we could create opportunities for more people to be able to bid on it and not have it be quite as large, which is, I think, a good process for us as we go forward. I think one of the other things that, just as we think about this, is just how to share that the information on the analysis of why we didn't set a goal and actually have that as part of the business item, so that we know what that analysis looks like and really make sure that we're not missing something in that analysis, because we have in some of the contracts there are people that appear to be able to do the work, but somehow they're not bidding on it. And what we don't know is that because we've written the contract in such a way that it favors certain vendors. It's just the way we've always done it, and so I think without trying to get to that next layer of understanding, when there are people that could bid on things and they choose not to, and many of our contracts that come before various committees in the council, we have that same challenge where there are people, sometimes it's size of the contract, sometimes it's opportunity. We'd like to just think about how we can bring some of those things to light earlier in the process so that we can be as inclusive in our thinking as to how we can bring more vendors into the mix, or making sure if there are people that could be a subcontractor in these projects, that we're putting a goal in place that would encourage that work. And of course, if people can't find subcontractors, they can always submit their good faith effort and then not have to and not meet the goal and still be awarded the contract as long as they tried to. So because that can happen. People can be too busy to do the work or take on more contracts, and but that's the whole purpose of the good faith effort exemption to meeting a proposed goal on a contract. So I just wanted to put that on the table. Councilmember Lee and I have been, and Councilmember Musi have been on. We've been through a few of these discussions with the BIPOC working group, and just wanted to see if there's any other thoughts that people have. We'd like to do is sort of review this probably in more detail at our next meeting and see if there's any changes to what we need to tools we need to give procurement or OEO, so that we can make sure that we're not still somehow we're not quite finding our rhythm to pull people into our contracts when there are people potentially available. In this one, I don't know people in this space, but some other contracts we have, there are people out there that we've seen do work for other agencies, but we're not able to pull them into our contract. So just wanting to understand that, just see if there's any thoughts from committee members as we think about this and think about bringing something forward for conversation at our next meeting.
This is Mr. Musa, the chair. I would be interested in knowing why focus would not apply, didn't apply. Sometimes in understanding the core barrier, and underlining, issues may be helpful, and also it may be helpful to, for our in the team to work with the outreach folks to do maybe sometimes many potential small businesses of color don't know this opportunity exists. So maybe connecting the procurement with the outreach as a team, that may close some gap. And in addition to that, also many council members in this council have a deep community ties. If the team, notifies us, we can also spread the word out about it and say, hey, with our network, and that way we may increase the pool of possible, candidates for such opportunities. But this is really a very critical issue. And it's a really important way to close the opportunity gap, and we have to do what we can to really create opportunities.
Any other thoughts? Okay. So sorry.
So, Mr. Chair, one of the things that you and I discussed a little bit, and I've had a opportunity to talk to Jody about before the meeting, is the need to see those opportunities sooner. So the example today before you that you're about to vote on is one that we saw in an extension of a contract earlier in the year, and we had an opportunity to say, hey, let's do something different with that, and that really brought us to that process that Jody and Elaine focused on. That should happen on every contract. That early targeting of how we bring this one out to bid. And so one of the things that we talked about is part of our procurement reporting that we do on a quarterly basis, that we include a list of contracts that are expiring in the next 6 months to give some public, and we can post that as well, some public notice that these contracts are going to be going out for bid soon, and we can have a discussion around either in the management committee or pushing back to the program managers about how we want to bring those forward and where we see opportunities.
Totally, it's about that. That's really clear idea, and it will make a difference.
Yeah, and when we sort of, as we do that, we just want to think about how do we share sort of maybe some of the components of those contracts that are coming up, so that if there are businesses either that are unregistered or they haven't updated their MCUB listing or their DB listing, that if they're able to do work on some of those upcoming contracts, we can make sure that they are properly connected with the OEO office and the contracts procurement group, so that we can, as our business units are thinking about people, we have a much better idea of who's available to do work, and so we can be more accurate in those calculations. Because I think one of the things that I will say that many businesses that I know, and myself included, you tend to upload your stuff, as I did 12 years ago, and I'm not sure I've never ever edited what I uploaded 12 years ago, and obviously our businesses has changed, right? So if people know there are contracts coming that are in their space, it behooves them to do that. Businesses will have to do the work if they want to win the business. They have to. It's not like we're trying to give people business. But we're wanting to give people opportunity to go out and be successful and win business. So if we allow people to know what's coming, and that's a space they're interested in, then they can go in and make those updates and make the proper connections with our team to make people aware of what services they can offer and how they might be able to be either a subcontractor or a bidder on one of the upcoming contracts. So that was sort of our thought, and we'll bring something forward and talk about this a little bit more at our next meeting, because there are a couple of other policy changes of just incorporating some tools that we have available that hopefully we can get put into place at our next meeting for Jody and her team to be able to use and leverage. So any other, and I'll just say one other part of that is in RFPs, the ability to, other agencies have done this, and we have done it a few times, but the ability for us to include a qualitative review of people's just general, how they engage from an equity perspective. Either it could be internal, it could be external, and that could be just part of the evaluation criteria and process. It's not a you must do X or Y to be successful, but it's something that it is a factor in our decision. So if we have for example, if we have an organization that does a phenomenal job, or a national leader in equity, and they're 1% higher than somebody that has done nothing in equity and has equity complaints against them, then we would have the option, let's say, of spending 1% more to get, or a certain factor to be able to get a company that has been very diligent and successful. It doesn't matter. It's not a question about who owns the business or who runs the business or anything else. It's really just a question of what people are doing within their organization, and we can make that assessment. So we've done it a couple of times, and other agencies are using that as a tool to encourage companies to think more deeply about how they treat their employees and equity more broadly in their business. So that would be one other piece that another level we might be able to bring to bear. So any other conversation on how we went through this process, and just thoughts that we should make sure we include for our next meeting?
Mr. Chair, this is Councilmember Musa. So generally speaking, I just would like to really underscore that into our procurement team that many and the most of POC, small businesses are generally operating from a huge position of disadvantage. So understanding that, and it's really key, element, and knowing that they have, so many barriers to jump and to clear. So treating them with a special care and doing everything in our capacity to, help them will go a long way if we are committed and serious about, equity and inclusion.
Thank you. All right, any other comments? Seeing none, can we get a motion to approve?
Mr. Chair,
business item?
this is General Counsel Ann Bloodhart. Sorry to jump in here. It looks like Jody had a comment in the chat that I don't believe I heard out loud, and that was to answer your question. No MCUP vendor submitted a proposal. I just wanted to make sure that was spoken for the meeting. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve business item 2021-193?
I'll
Move
move
it.
approval.
Second by Lee.
Okay, moved by Barber, seconded by Lee. Any other discussion? All right, can we call the roll, please?
Barber,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next business item is 2021-196, labor agreement, the law enforcement labor services. Marcy?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. We have reached a ratified agreement with a law enforcement labor services. Our supervisors and sergeants represents approximately 38 members, 38 employees in the bargaining unit. Their contract expired on December 31st, 2020. We have a new labor agreement ratified on the 14th by the union. It is a 2-year agreement with wage increases of 2% in year 1 and 2% in year 2. There are also some minor changes in language related to overtime assignment and the bidding process. This is a deviation from the 3-year agreements that we've been able to reach with some of our other unions, but we believe we'll be able to bring this into synchronized position in our next round of bargaining. Under the Thrive Lens analysis, it is a settlement that falls within the parameters established by the Council for managing labor costs. And prosperity, the agreement represents a fair and reasonable wage settlement and demonstrates our commitment to investment in our employees. The proposed action today is authorization for the regional administrator to enter into a labor agreement with law enforcement labor services supervisors and sergeants, supervisors, sergeants, and lieutenants, effective January 1, 2021 through December 31st, 2022.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions for the presenter? All right, seeing none, can we get a motion to approve business item 2021-196, please?
Johnson moves.
Moved by Johnson,
Second by Barber.
seconded by Barber. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee, Musse,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. The motion carries. That's all we have for business items for today. So we have one informational item, that is the 2022 operational budget, levies and administrative general fund and levies presentation. Marie?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I am Marie Henderson, the Deputy CFO, and today we'll be talking about the proposed operating budget for Regional Administration and General Fund and the levy. We can go ahead to the next slide. As you know, we have many steps in the budget cycle, and we have two statutory deadlines that are highlighted in red in our budget development timeline. The levy adoption on August 25th is the upper limit. After September 1st, the council can lower, but it cannot raise the total levy amount. And metro area counties consider our levy amount when establishing their own budgets and tax levies and mail the truth in taxation notifications to property owners showing the proposed amount of property taxes from all taxing jurisdictions. On August 25th will also be the adoption of the preliminary budget. So we're reviewing the general fund today and the levy, and as the other committees have been reviewing their budget proposals for the 2022 year, at the August 11th council meeting, you will see the operating budget in its full cloth. So on the next slide, if you remember on June 23rd, I reviewed with you the levy strategy for each of these line items of the non-debt and debt portions of the property tax levy. Just a really quick refresher today that our non-debt levy service limits increase each year in accordance with the measurement of the government inflation called the implicit rate deflator. Over the past 10 years, the average increase has been 2%, although we have seen years that were less than 1%. The rate this year is 2.73%, and this amount is used to maximize our general purpose levy and livable communities demonstration account. The debt service portion of the levy is not limited by this inflation rate, but for transit and parks are effectively limited by statutory authority granted to us to issue debt. By maximizing our general purpose levy, this is the most flexible dollars, keeping statutory requirements and the direction to keep our overall levy at a 2%. The levy proposed is $90.5 million, which will be formally asked for adoption at the council meeting on August 25th. On the next slide, I'd like to spend a little bit time on the general purpose levy of the 16.58 million. Again, we say it a lot, but it's so true that the general purpose levy is our most flexible use of and our preliminary funds. Per statute, $1 million of the general purpose levy is transferred to the local housing initiative account each year. And this year, 12.34 million of the levy is proposed to be spent on the administrative activities in community development and in HRA. This is an increase from last year of around 10%. This leaves for this council this year 3.24 million for this council to look at target initiatives for those one-time projects or bridging funds for equity projects. So keeping that in mind, the next slide, I'd like to go over just real quick, going back 5 years, this council has set aside almost $34 million of the general purpose levy for one-time projects or bridging funds. So it's this administration and your prior. There is a handout also posted on today's agenda that consists of the detailed listing of all of these projects and their status or their outcome. And today I would just like to highlight a few of these wonderful projects from different areas around the council. The 2021 projects that are listed on the first page of that handout are all the current projects that we just approved back in April of 2021. So they have all been started, but because of the late start, the outcomes will not be presented at this time, but will be at a later time. Again, just highlighting a few. In 2020, we set aside $1 million in CD for homelessness incentive. This funding is
to be used for 2 housing projects. The first one is an Emma Norton resident at the Ford redevelopment site in St. Paul, and this will serve homeless women. The second one is West Creek Apartments in Chaska to serve homeless youth. In 2020, we set aside amounts for the engagement and training of MCUBs. New orientation information sessions were conducted for small businesses newly certified. A workshop was conducted for all businesses on how to do business with the council. OEO and procurement were presenters in conducting virtual sessions. OEO staff also conducted a mentor prodigy event that paired larger, more established contractors with MCUB certified businesses. Great story is US Frick, a Black-owned construction company, was paired with Rice Lake contractors. US Frick had no previous contracts with the council as of 2019 and early 2020, but through their mentor prodigy agreement facilitated between OEO, they have been able to gain experience, capacity, and they secured 4 council subcontracts totaling $1.2 million. In 2019, we set aside $1 million for ADA compliance. Buildings have been updated to improve functions under the American Disability Act. Many projects have been completed around council properties, including doors, signage, and restroom modifications. If you ever have a chance also recently to come down to Robert Street, you'll see a brand new Even Plaza that helped fix drainage issues and make that a beautiful entrance to the council. In 2017, ES had competitive regional stormwater initiative grant program. This money was used for grants to help reach sustainable water resource goals for many projects, including the city of Fridley Civic Center Complex, Minneapolis East Side Storage and Maintenance Facility, New Brighton's Lions Park, Independent School District 112 Kindergarten Center, which is in East Harvard, Crystal Becker Park, and Shoreview Rice Creek. You'll see throughout this document that we have set aside money for a lot of storm water initiative grants. In 2016, we had money set aside for planning assistance grants. These grants in both 2015 and 2016 provided support to 106 communities, including both sewer and unsewered communities, and communities, townships, and small cities. Again, in this document, you will find spending for local housing initiative accounts to help support affordable housing units in our area. In 2016, Metro Transit had $1 million set aside for bus shelter and amenities. Over the past several years, a goal to add 150 new shelters was achieved at bus stops that did not have them previously, and we improved over 75 existing shelters with lights or heat. Using community engagement, the shelter placement guidelines, which set the priorities for shelter locations, were updated. There's now tools in place to measure the outcome of the success of these shelters. Metro Transit is also continuing to improve customer service experience at bus stops through information, accessible boarding areas, and pedestrian connections at higher ridership bus stops. In 2015, Metro Transit also launched its first mass transit technical program equity grant. The initial MTT cohort launched in 2015 and completed in 2018, resulting in the graduation and employment of 11 individuals as bus mechanic technicians. Successful participants earned an AAS degree from Hennepin Tech College while interning full-time at Metro Transit. Cohort members were diverse students, and the success of this project resulted in the delivery of 2 additional cohorts. We do have representatives today if there was any questions about any of these projects over the last 5 years. Okay, we can go on to the next slide, which is the general fund operations. For the 2022 budget, the general fund operation proposal is at 102.5 million. The funding sources for the general purpose levy, allocations to the divisions, and other, which is mostly interest. The pie on the left, you'll see that the uses are by department. This includes regional administration costs, community development, the statutory transfer, and targeted initiatives for equity items for one-time funding to be determined by this council. The pie chart on the right, you can see uses by category. The largest category is salaries and benefits at 53%, followed by contracted services at almost 30%. And the next slide is the general fund unassigned operating reserve. When looking at the unassigned operating reserve for the general fund, the target fund balance is 10% per our policy, which is 9.6 million proposal in 2022, and the proposed budget then ending with a balance of 12.4 million. And that, Mr. Chair, that's what I have today and open for any questions.
Are there any questions from council members?
Mr. Chair, could we just put up the slide again that just showed where we're at this for 2022? The decision we'll have to make by August, what, 25th, I think you said.
August, Mr. Chair and committee members, August 25th is the levy. The amount for the one-time appropriations is the 3.24.
So, Mr. Chair and committee members, our statutory deadline of September 1st, so that second meeting in August is when we ask you to adopt a preliminary budget and to set the maximum levy for the council. As Marie said, the other thing that we'd be asking the management committee to take a look at is targeted initiatives. 3.24 million is available for the council to target 2 initiatives in your that kind of fit in your strategic plan. Equity was the focus of the last year. Certainly is an area that we could continue to target funds at. Climate is another area that the chair has suggested might be purposeful for us this year. One of the things that I would recommend is we've got in this last year we targeted some projects that were multi-year projects. It might be useful in this year to try to find some very shovel-ready projects that can be completed through the end of this governor's first term.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson.
follow up on that? Thank you, Mary. Appreciate that a lot. Could we, is housing something again that we could use for some of the targeted initiative money?
Mr. Chair and committee members, really, I think that's the discussion that you need to have as a group, where you'd like to target those funds and where they can be of most use. We do not need to decide that before we adopt a preliminary budget, but I really would like us to get to some decisions on that by the time we adopt a final budget, so that we're giving our staff more time to get things in place and get those funds spent.
Mr. Chair, a follow up if I could, just on this a little bit yet. So yeah, thanks, Mary. I just didn't hear it coming. I heard climate and I heard equity, well, you know, we've got all big goals, right? I just didn't hear housing, so I didn't know if there was some
Absolutely.
staff discussion or, you know, suggestions that those might be a higher priority right now, although it's all a high priority, right? So I just want to be mindful that, you know, if we go, I mean, these are all important, so that's a given. And so then how do we cover our bases? You know, it's a lot of money, but yet it's not a lot of money. So that's why, I mean, I'll probably, you know, want to at least dip our toe in the housing discussion again, just because, you know, we see projects again that can't find that funding gap and fill that funding gap, I should say, and maybe some of this again could go for that, but it can be for another day, I think. And then if I could just ask one more question on the slide, I think that came, maybe it was, I don't know, it was the slide that just had all the pictures on it, that had the 2015 through 2021. So this is the total amount, and then we would add another 3.75 or whatever onto this.
Mr.
Okay,
Chair, Committee
great.
member, that's correct.
And I'm not asking for this at this point because the report was good. It would be nice to have a visual of what each, you know, we verbally reported, orally reported it out, but it would just help me to see, okay, on paper when I'm, you know, 2 days away from this meeting or something, just trying to compare where we've invested our money, and now we've got another 375, and you know where it could go. So that's all. That's just a help for me as I think through things as a member of the committee. But those
Mr.
are my
Chair and committee members, we did post, after the agenda was posted, we did post a list out to the, with outcomes. And so if you go up to the agenda that's been posted, you'll be able to now click on there and find a list that goes from 2015 to 2021.
Okay, thank you for that. Lori did get it to me, and I just didn't even get to that part. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, as a matter of process, if you would like, I can certainly solicit from staff ideas that we would bring back to the management committee that focus on the 4 areas of the strategic initiatives. We can certainly do that. If there's a particular area you'd like us to focus on this year, since we did, you know, we've covered some areas in the past, and maybe you want to go back and look at where we've spent in the past and decide, you know, whose turn it is or what's the highest priority for this year. But I can certainly solicit from staff once I know your priority.
I would just say from my perspective, I think we should be looking for things, as you mentioned, that are ready to go, right? So that they can be done in the next, in, you know, 2022, ideally, or mostly done. And then the other thing I'd be curious to know, which I think was a little bit of Councilmember Johnson's question, was like, where we made investments in the past. So, you know, of the 33 million, how much of that went to housing, how much went to equity, how much went to the environment, et cetera, just sort of a broad brush. And then are there certain areas that we're seeing greater impact or return on investment, or however you want to look at it, for the dollars spent, right? So last year we spent $4.6 million in housing. How many units did that create, right? How did that help us get into, or maybe last year is too recent, but if you look further back, just so we can kind of really try to prioritize the limited amount of funds. And for me, I'd like to put them in places where where they're going to have the greatest impact, right? I think there are ways of getting at all of our priorities, and so if we have some opportunities from that can come up from staff, that where a, you know, small amount of money here or there will have a very big impact. You know, last year we reinvested in the apprenticeship program, or the, you know, the because it had a great impact, right? It was clear that, you know, it was a very good, successful program. So I think identifying where the money really has made a big difference and has had an impact, I think will allow us to sort of see where to make those investments. And I do think we should be looking at least at first at all of the areas that we have as priorities, and not get overly focused on a particular area, because obviously we have a lot of things that really are important to the work that we do, and seeing how we can get stuff done in 2022 that are going to have a significant impact, I think, and identifying those ideas from staff, that would be wonderful.
Great. Thank you. That makes sense to me as well.
Okay, any other questions on this item? Greg, if you could
Mr.
take
Chair?
that slide down, I can't quite see everybody, so. Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Marie and Mary for putting the list together of all the targeted initiatives. So it's really nice to see everything all in one place. Sometimes when we're looking at these things, it feels like a drop in the bucket compared to some of the other things we have budgeted. But to look back and to remember that the Metro Transit Technician Training Program came out of an equity, almost a competitive equity grant program that we had directed internally facing at council of we wanted people in our staff to be innovative, and something like that that's really shown a long-term impact. Even if you look at sort of some of the stormwater innovation grants, some of those things, you see that at CHS field, you see it at the new soccer field. Some of these things that seemed like they were small things maybe when we first did them, but not only became important long-term things, but great examples for other people to use as they were looking at ways to direct funds to try and make an impact. So thank you for putting it all in one place. It's really actually kind of an impressive list once you get it together.
Yes, agreed. Thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, if I could just say, and again, I just popped into that document, so that's perfect. Thank you. I don't know how I missed it or why I missed it, but it is excellent. So thanks for that. And I like the outcomes column. And to Chris's point earlier, especially on some of these more recent things, tracking how we're doing and how our investments are playing forward, I think is really good. So, and I also do support your comment, Mr. Chair, that we should look at all of kind of across the spectrum and not get too early focused into one area. So thanks for that.
All right, any other comments on this information item? Councilmember Barber, do you still have a question, or is that your other question? Okay. Somebody have a motion for me?
Mr. Chair, I'd move approval of the barking dog and the 22 operating budget development regional administration general funds levy as proposed by staff.
No, that would not be the motion. Motion on closure, sorry.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. It was an informational item. So sorry about that. I'll read this, but every time I click on my audio button, it beeps and it sets off an alarm for my dogs. So I'll be quick. Mr. Chair, I move to close this meeting under section 113D.03 subdivision 1 of the Minnesota open meeting law so we can consider a confidential setting, labor developments, and negotiations related to labor strategies.
Is there a second?
Second by Barber.
All right, thank you. So these last two informational items on the agenda today are to discussion of labor strategy and discussion of attorney-client privilege issues related to 7 pending litigation matters listed on the committee agenda. As a public body by majority vote, we may hold a closed meeting under provisions of section 13D-03 subdivision 1B of the Minnesota open meeting law to have discussions during this portion, meaning this closed portion of the meeting, must be confined to labor negotiation developments and or discussion or review of labor proposals, and of closed meeting on contracts or other, of legal matters of attorney-client privilege. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing none, can we have a vote to close the meeting? A roll call, please.
Barber.
Aye.
Johnson. Johnson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Musey.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Is the general counsel, can we do both of these motions now, or do we have to come back into session to close them again for our discussion of attorney-client work.
Mr. Chair, I think you could do the second motion now and then just indicate to the public that we won't be returning from the closed labor strategy meeting, but we'll be continuing right into the discussion of attorney-client privilege matters and then closing the meeting.
Okay. So could we have the second motion, please?
Mr. Chair, do you want me to just simply make the motion again, again, just as a separate item here? How do you want me to do this?
So the first motion covered the labor developments. The second motion covers discussion of legal counsel and attorney-client privilege matters.
So, Mr. Chair, did you want me to just amend my first motion and add that second part to it, or do you want a whole separate motion?
I think there's a separate motion written out for you because it's the separate subsection of the open
Okay.
meeting law.
Okay, got it. All right, sorry about that, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move to that this meeting also be closed to the public pursuant to Minnesota statutes 13D05, subdivision 3B, and applicable case law, so that the committee can discuss with our legal counsel in a confidential setting attorney-client privilege matters.
Is there a second?
Second by Barber.
Seconded by Barbara. And the public body by majority vote in a public meeting may decide to hold a closed meeting under section 13D-05 subdivision 3B of the open meeting law to discuss attorney-client privilege matters. Discussing these litigation matters in confidential setting will permit the council to engage in candid discussions and resolve these matters in a way that benefits the council and the public. Discussions during the closed portion of this meeting to discuss attorney-client matters will be confined to the pending litigation matters listed in the committee agenda. Can we have a roll call, please?
Barber,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
So thank you. And before we close this meeting, discuss our labor strategies and our pending litigation, I'd like to inform the members of the public for monitoring the meeting for the record that the committee will adjourn immediately after our discussion of these two informational items, and the committee will not have any discussions or conduct any business after these two informational items are complete. For the record, please note that the meeting was closed to the public at 3:14 p.m. on July 28th, 2021. And then I think the question is, do we have the right people in the room?